You can imagine to say biology is difficult and you can't clear, you can't pass. But one thing that I can tell you is that biology is just very simple, and this is the way we can make it simple for you. So in this video we are going to look at coordination. As you all know, to say coordination is divided into two: nervous system as well as endocrine system. So this one is focusing on the nervous system. As you all know, to say nervous system also, it is divided into central nervous system as well as peripheral nervous system. So this is the central nervous system. So the question is saying figure 4 shows a spinal reflex arc. So the spinal reflex arc takes place in the spinal cord. So the spinal cord, the structures that makes up the spinal cord, we have the gray matter as well as the white matter. So from this diagram here of the spinal cord, which ones here is representing the gray matter and which one here is representing the white matter? So actually this one, the way it is looking here, so it's a gray matter. So this is the gray matter. Then when it comes to L is called the white matter. So no one is going to ask you to give them the function of the white matter as well as the gray matter. They are just going to ask you to label these. Then since this one is a reflex arc, you need to know where you are going to find the effector and where you are going to find the receptor. So this is J. So J can be the receptor. Okay, it can be the receptor. So an example of a receptor we can give is a skin. So skin is an example of a receptor because it is able to detect stimulus. For example, you can talk of temperature, chemical, and other things, and touch is an example of the stimulus. So this skin here is able to convert now. Let me say this skin here, it has what we call the sensory receptors. So these sensory receptors, they are able to detect the stimulus, and from those sensory receptors they attach these nerves. This nerve here that you're able to see here, the one which is going to the spinal cord. So this nerve, we call it as the sensory neuron or the sensory nerve. So the reason why it is called the sensory neuron or sensory nerve, this is because it takes the information or the electrical impulse from the receptor side, or it converts the stimulus into an electrical impulse and take it to the spinal cord. That is its function. Then in the spinal cord, there is also a nerve which is found in the spinal cord, which is this O here is representing a nerve which is called the relay neuron, the one which is found in the spinal cord. So this relay neuron, it is the one now which interpret the information from the sensory neuron and take it to the motor neuron. So this nerve here, which is represented by L, this one here, it is called the motor neuron. That is one thing that you need to know here. So now, let me just label this one as the motor neuron or the motor nerve. Then we have this part here where this motor neuron is attaching to. So this one can be the gland or the muscle. It can be the muscle or the gland. That is M. Now, what is the function of the motor neuron? So this one takes the information from the spinal cord and take it to the effector. So the muscle as well as the gland, these are examples of effectors. Okay? So now let's try to answer the questions. So it is saying identify the parts labeled J and L. So part labeled J, where is J? J is here. So J can be the skin. So we can say the skin or the receptor. Or the receptor. Then for L is here. It's a white matter. So L is the white matter. Then for question B, saying explain the functions of the parts M and L and O. So what is M? M is the muscle or the gland. So in terms of the muscle, the function of the muscle is to contract in response to stimulus, or you can say to relax, whichever way you want. So you can say relax or contract in response to stimulus, or contract in response to stimulus, in response to stimulus. That's a function of the muscle. Then when it comes to O, this O here, like I said, is a relay neuron. So it connects two nerves, or it is the one that interprets the information or the signal and send it to the motor neuron. So we can say connect two neurons. To connect two neurons or two nerves. So those are the functions that you need to know. Then for question C, saying which two letters in figure 4 form part of the spinal cord. So the spinal cord in this figure 4 is formed of the gray matter as well as the white matter. So the relay neuron is not part of, it's just found in the spinal cord. It's not part of the spinal cord. So we can say it is K and L. So we can say K and L. So for K, which is representing the gray matter, and then L, which is representing the white matter. Then question D saying give one example of the spinal reflex and cranial reflex. So when it comes to the spinal reflex, we can talk of knee jerk. A knee jerk. Then apart from knee jerk, we can also give an example of withdrawing the hand once we touch an hot object. So withdraw the hand. Withdraw the hand. When you touch an hot object. An hot object. So you can just choose from these two. You can just choose one. Then an example of the cranial reflex. By the way, when you talk of the spinal reflex, these are just reflexes which are controlled by the what? By the spinal cord. Okay? So knee jerk and withdrawing the hand when once you touch an hot object is an example of the spinal reflex, as well as jumping once you sit on jump after sitting on the pin or a sharp object. That one is also an example of a spinal reflex. When you talk of cranial reflex or reflexes action or reflex action, these are just action or reflexes which are not consciously controlled by the brain. But you know to say that the brain controls many activities, but these reflexes, they are not controlled by the brain. So for example, you can talk of blinking. So blinking, you never find blinking being controlled by sometimes it can be controlled, but it's not always. It's just automatic. When you talk of reflexes, these are just automatic responses. So you can't tell yourself, the brain can't tell, it can't tell you to say blink, and so on. No, this one is just automatically, it just happens on its own. Then apart from that one, you can also talk of changing the size of the pupil. Okay, changing the size of the pupil. So what it means, changing the size of the pupil. What it means here is this. You find that once you are exposed to the high light intensity, the pupil is going to reduce in size, because you're going to find that the sacral muscles of the iris, they are going to do what? They are going to contract, whilst the longitudinal muscles are going to relax in order to reduce the pupil. This one is very, very important in that it prevents the damage of the cells in the cornea. So that one is very, very important. Even from this one, you can just choose one. Okay, so question E is saying what is the overall function of the nervous system? So the overall function of the nervous system is to transmit electrical impulse. So you can say to transmit the electrical impulse. Transmit electrical impulse. Electrical impulse or impulses. Then from there, I also have question 5, which is coming from genetics. So the first one is saying define mutation. So in talk of mutation can affect the genes. It can also affect the chromosomes. Okay, it can affect the genes as well as it can affect the chromosomes. So you know to say that the chromosomes in somatic cells. They are about 47, let me say 46 chromosomes. When there are 47, meaning to say that one is Down syndrome. So that one can also occur due to mutation. Then let's say, for example, if there is change in gene structure, meaning to say mutation has occurred. So by definition, when you talk of mutation, it's just a change in gene structure as well as the number of chromosomes. So you can say change in gene structure, change in gene structure, and number of chromosomes, that is mutation. Alright, so for question Roman number 2 is saying state 2 causes of mutation. So mutation can be caused due to exposure to radiation. So you can talk of exposure to radiation, radiations. Okay, these radiations can be, for example, you can talk of the UV, which is the ultraviolet. You can also talk of radioactive elements like uranium. Those can cause mutation. Then apart from that one, you can also talk of exposure to atomic bombs. Okay, so you can talk of exposure to chemicals. So different chemicals, they can cause what? Mutation, or environmental factors, they can also cause mutation. Then we also have question B, which is saying a couple both with normal eye color produce an albino child. Explain using a genetic diagram how this one would be possible using the alleles capital letter A and small letter B to represent gene for skin color. So what we are going to do here, for them to have a child who is an albino, for them being normal, what are we going to do? So we are going to say we need to start with the phenotype, which is an outward appearance of a living organism. So the phenotype here, we are going to have the male close with the female, or you can say father close with mother. Then genotype. So under genotype here, we need to use now the alleles. They were normal, so we have to put A and small letter, capital letter A and small letter A, capital letter A and small letter A. The reason why I'm using this is because this A is dominant over small letter A. So this one has to be normal. An albino is only expressed in this form where we are going to have homozygous recessive. So in this case here, this one can be an albino. So for us to make sure that we have a child who is an albino, we are going to use these two. Then the next one is going to be splitting the gametes. So on part of splitting the gametes, this is what we are going to have. Even here, this is what we are going to have. Then followed by the random assortment. So under random assortment, what we are going to do, this one here can be close with this. Then what are we going to have? Here we are going to have AA. Then this one can be close with this. Then here what are we going to have? We are going to have capital letter A and small letter A. Then this one here can be close with this. Then what are we going to have? We're going to have capital letter A and small letter A. Then lastly, we are going to have this one being close with this. Then what are we going to have? Small letters. So at least here we are having a child who is being expressed in terms of homozygous recessive. So we have a son. At least we have one child who is color blindness, isn't it? Is it color blindness? Who is an albino? I can say who is an albino. So this one is going to be F1 genotype. The reason why we are saying F1 genotype because these are alleles. Okay. Then the next one is going to be F1 phenotype, where we are going to specify what we have here. So this is normal. Even this one is going to be normal. Even this one is normal. Then the last one is going to be albino. So this is how you're supposed to express it. Then from there we are done.